Hi, I'm Amelia. Thank you for joining me today for a walkthrough of UtopiaR, our secure, cloud-based solution which will help your organisation to meet many of the requirements of the recently published EU General Data Protection Regulation, also known as GDPR. Applying across the European Union, this expanded data protection framework requires much greater protection for citizens' personal data in our increasingly digital world, by increasing the level of due diligence, physical, technical and procedural controls which apply to data processing. Following the UK's planned departure from the European Union, a closely aligned approach to data protection will mean that the GDPR framework is expected to continue under UK legislation. To demonstrate compliance with the GDPR's requirement for privacy by design, as described in Article 35, organisations are required to complete and document privacy impact assessments for all high-risk data processing activities. These are also known as data protection impact assessments. These assessments are required for any activity which processes personal data and which has a risk of infringing the rights or freedoms of a data subject. We've developed our Privacy Impact Assessment solution so that organisations can demonstrate effective compliance with this complex GDPR requirement and provides them with supporting records which can be shared with citizens and stakeholders alike. But that's not all. UtopiaR also includes functionality which highlights and reports other areas of GDPR non-compliance, which can then be promptly addressed to ensure the regulation is being complied with. Privacy impact assessments, also known as data protection impact assessments within GDPR, are planned activities to identify any privacy and compliance issues within specific business activities. UtopiaR provides a clear and logical approach to help you complete an assessment, and over the next few minutes we'll take a look at the component sections and the details contained within the assessment report which is produced once the assessment has been finalised. Before we start, we need to define one or more roles within UtopiaR and add some users into the system against those roles. From the general menu, select Manage Roles. Within UtopiaR, we purposely keep the management of roles and users separate. The reason for doing this is to ensure continuity, so when someone leaves the business or changes their role, we won't have their activities and assessments being abandoned with nobody looking after them. Instead, we assign activities to a role, for example, a security manager, network manager, or accounts assistant. I can easily add a new role by clicking the Create Role button at the top of the screen. Returning to the general menu, we can now turn our attention to individual users. Select Manage Users. This shows us a list of users within UtopiaR, and we can add more users by clicking the Create User at the top of the screen. You'll note that each user needs one or more roles assigned to them, as we noted a moment ago. To change any of the properties of a user, we simply click Edit next to their name. Aside from changing their email address or assigned role, this area also allows us to determine what type of user each individual is, whether a system-wide ISMS manager, a role-specific activity or asset owner, or a non-functional read-only account. Another function of the user menu is to report the date and time that each user last logged into UtopiaR. This allows managers to easily see which users are active. Finally, in this section, the general menu also includes a setting for the review frequency of each privacy impact assessment. This can be adjusted to meet your organisation's individual needs, but we'd recommend that assessments are reviewed on at least an annual basis. To start a new activity assessment, click the Privacy Impact Assessment button on the left menu. Then click Add System or Activity, and we can start to identify the activity which is to be assessed. Firstly, enter a clear and concise name for the activity, for example, HR administration. Each activity requires an assigned owner. We reviewed roles earlier, and within the Activity Owner box, choose the appropriate owner. If the required owner is not found, we can return to the general menu where the role can be added. Now we should provide more details about the purpose of the activity. In our example, this might be employee management performance reviews and disciplinary actions. Of course, we could enter these singly, but for the purpose of this demonstration, we'll group them together. Next, we need to identify key stakeholders in the process. Remember that these can include internal and external stakeholders. So continuing our example, we'll note HR manager, HR assistant, all company personnel. Finally, on this screen, we should assess whether this activity is being undertaken as a legitimate interest of our business. GDPR provides a number of examples of activities that are necessary for the legitimate interest of the data controller, and if any of these apply to your assessment, then they should be selected here with supporting narrative. For our example, we will select Recital 48 as our HR process is deemed necessary for the administration of the business. Of course, you do not have to select any. If you do, GDPR requires this to be documented in relevant information notices. And if you're a public authority, Article 6(1) of GDPR notes that you can no longer use legitimate interests for discharging the various functions of your authority. Our user manual contains more information. Click Create to proceed to the next step, a basic privacy impact assessment for the activity. Using a set of simple questions, Utopia will determine whether a more comprehensive or full assessment is required. As we work our way through these 9 questions for our HR administration process, we'll answer yes to questions 1.1 to 1.5 and no to the remainder. Once completed, click Save. If all 9 questions had been answered no, we'll then be asked to finalise the assessment at that point, as no personal data is being processed. In our example, however, we've identified that personal data is being processed, and instead we'll now be presented with sections 2, 3 and 4, which make up the remaining sections needed for the full privacy impact assessment. Click Edit next to section 2.1 and we see a list of many different categories of personal data and sensitive personal data, which may be involved within the activity which we're assessing. Identify and select all applicable fields. Note whether the information is in paper form, held electronically, or both. When finished, click Return to Summary. At this stage, you'll note that the summary shows you how many different data categories have been selected. Section 2.2 allows us to record whether this assessment notes a change of use for personal data which our organisation already holds, for example, for a new process or with updated stakeholders. Moving on to Section 2.3 now, we need to identify and record which individuals and systems have access to the personal data which is being used within our activity. Click the Add New Access and Logging item, and we can identify which individuals, groups of people or IT systems access the personal data being processed, and whether their access is being logged and audited, or neither. When all access has been identified and logged, click Return to Summary. Again, the summary page records how many access requirements have been recorded. Section 2.4 asks us whether any personal data is subject to off-site or offshore processing or storage. If any of these questions are answered yes, you should add supporting narrative to support your response and answer the supplementary questions which will then be presented to you. Within Section 2.5, we seek to identify whether our employees and separately any contractors or external third parties who may be involved have been properly trained for the roles they perform in connection with the activity being assessed. Complete this section and press Save when you've finished. In Section 3, we turn our focus to the individual data flows or transactions that take place within the activity that's being assessed, noting that it's common for there to be more than one data flow defined. This stage identifies which data categories are being transferred between different participants and how the data is being protected as it moves through the activity. Please try and be as accurate as possible when you identify, understand and record each data flow. Click Return to Summary when you've finished. Finally, Section 4 asks us specific questions about the activity's compliance with data protection legislation. 4.1 explores the legitimacy of the activity, with questions about data accuracy, retention periods, data disposal, access control and country of processing. Optional comments boxes are provided which should be used to further explain the responses which you've provided. 4.2 identifies whether sensitive personal data or data about children is processed by the activity. Again, add supporting comments to your responses as necessary. 4.3 explores activities related to the consent of the data subject for their personal data to be processed by this activity. Moving on to 4.4, Utopia seeks to understand whether data breach notification processes are in place in the event that personal data is lost, stolen, or subject to unauthorized disclosure. Section 4.5 asks about your preparedness for complying with the rights of data subjects, for example, to determine if processes exist for responding to data subject access requests, the correction of any inaccurate data, or for the deletion of their personal data upon request. As with all questions in Section 4, remember to add in supporting narrative to help explain your responses. More information on data subject rights is provided within the Utopia user manual. Finally, Section 4.6 asks whether your organisation has had any need to consult the Information Commissioner's Office or equivalent supervisory authority if you're not in the UK about high-risk data processing activities. Once we've completed all of Section 4, returning to the summary page, we can see a Finalise button is now displayed at the bottom of the page. If this is not visible for some reason, check the individual lines of the summary to identify any errors or missing content which should be corrected. Once finalised, return to the menu of Privacy Impact Assessments and we'll see that a PDF button is now displayed to the right of the activity name. Let's open this and take a look at its content. The first page is a summary of the Privacy Impact Assessment that's just been completed, noting the activity name, the name of the person who completed the assessment and the date. It also displays any identified stakeholders and legitimate interests which may have been recorded. The next few pages provide information narrative, which explains to data subjects why the Privacy Impact Assessment has been undertaken and how they should use this report to make an informed decision about whether they should be sharing their personal data. It explains each of the sections in the report, much as we have done so far in this video. After the introductory text, the next page contains identified observations. Rather than being matters which the data subject needs to concern themselves with, this section contains important information identified from our assessment which they need to consider before deciding to entrust their personal data to the activity we have assessed. The next section, however, records identified privacy risks. Using information gathered during the Privacy Impact Assessment, this page highlights shortcomings and potential issues with the activity that data subjects need to be made aware of. Ideally, as a reputable organisation, we will not be happy with any content in this section, and we'll want to use any highlighted issues as a trigger to implement or improve our processes and controls, such that the activity can then be reassessed and the shortcomings resolved. The remainder of the report displays your responses to the Privacy Impact Assessments. For data subjects concerned with the privacy of their personal data, this provides them with transparency about our activity and the way that their personal data will be processed within it. If we have a need to reassess an activity that's previously been completed within Utopia, click the Reassess button for the relevant activity. This will open a new assessment which can be progressed as we saw above. If, however, only minor changes are required from an existing finalised assessment, it may be easier to reload the most recent version and use this as a basis for editing against the current activity. This can easily be achieved by clicking the Load Previous button, and from the list of completed assessments which is presented, choose the existing activity which you would like to bring back for editing. Click Load, and the pre-populated Privacy Impact Assessment will be ready for you to amend as required. Finally, on the left-hand menu, you'll see a Calendar function. This provides easy visibility of when each Privacy Impact Assessment has been completed, as well as when the next planned reassessment is due. We hope that our session today has given you a useful insight into how our Utopia Privacy Impact Assessment solution works. It's already being widely used here in the UK and with a growing number of customers across Europe. We're pleased to have received positive feedback that they have found Utopia easy to use and even users with little or no previous data protection experience can quickly start to produce compliant privacy impact assessment reports. Utopia is cloud-based, which means that it can be accessed throughout your organisation and your users can work on a variety of devices, whether that's laptops, desktops or tablets. Users can also access Utopia from home, or indeed anywhere where they have internet connectivity. The Utopia software brings all privacy impact assessment records together into one central space, which provides for prompt and effective management of assessments and ease of issuing privacy impact assessment reports on request. Thank you for your interest in Utopia. Please let us know of any questions you may have and we'll be pleased to help you. Alternatively, visit our website at www.utopia.cloud for more information. We look forward to hearing from you.